Picture yourself walking through the hushed corridors of the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. The sterile hum of the fluorescent lights echoes softly overhead. Glass cases hold fragments of lives long extinguished, bronze tools, weathered pottery shards, tablets etched with wedge-shaped cuneiform that resemble bird tracks scratched into the skin of the earth. In one quiet corner, barely noticed by most visitors, rests a curious clay prism only about 20 centimeters tall, 4 sides, each one covered in precise, deliberate impressions from a reed stylus pressed into soft mud over 4,000 years ago. Its label is simple: Weld Blundell Prism, circa 1800 BCE. Visitors pass it by, unaware that this object may hold one of the most mysterious documents in human history, a document that whispers of a world long forgotten. This prism is the original source of the Sumerian King List, a chronicle that begins not with mythic flourishes, but with a direct and unsettling claim. After kingship descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu. From that moment, it records 8 kings who ruled in ancient Sumer before a great flood swept over the land. What captures attention isn't their names Alulim, Alaljar, and Menluana, but the lengths of their reigns. Alulim is said to have ruled for 28,800 years. Alaljar reigned for 36,000. The total reign of these 8 kings stretches to 241,000 years. And then the flood came. Civilization, it says, was reset. After the flood, kingship is said to descend again from heaven. But something fundamental changes. The reigns that follow are shorter, hundreds of years at first, still impossible by our standards, but nothing like before. Slowly, reign lengths diminish, with each successive ruler 700 years, 400, then 200, until we reach kings whose reigns can be verified by archaeology and historical cross-referencing. Gilgamesh, the legendary king of Uruk, is listed as reigning for 26 years a stretch, perhaps, but one that lands within the realm of human lifespans. The document reads like a civilization forgetting how to live forever. This progression is more than peculiar. It feels deliberate, patterned, as if the ancients were recording something they didn't quite understand themselves. Something older than memory, older than the tools they used to carve the record. Scholars typically dismiss the exaggerated reigns as symbolic. They say these were not meant to be taken literally, just myths to establish divine authority, or calendrical numerology that once had meaning but lost it over time. But if that were the case, why the precision? Why inscribe these numbers in clay with such care and regularity? Why repeat them across multiple versions of the King List discovered in different cities? The question isn't whether the Sumerians believed these kings lived for tens of thousands of years. The question is whether they were trying to preserve something deeper, a legacy, a memory of time so long ago and so far removed from their present that it could only be encoded in archetypes and numbers. Perhaps they were preserving not biographies but epochs, not men, but ages. We may scoff at the idea of a man ruling for 36,000 years, but we don't question when we say that the Renaissance lasted 300 years, or that the Iron Age followed the Bronze. Maybe these kings are not people, but poetic placeholders for civilizations we no longer remember. What makes the prism especially haunting is not what it records, but how it reads like a countdown. A long, slow descent from cosmic reigns to ordinary rule, from the impossible to the plausible, from myth to memory. It gives the eerie sense that something was once known, once lived, and that the knowledge of how to live so long, how to build so greatly, how to hold on to kingship that was, in their words, from heaven, has slipped away with each passing generation. The great flood that divides the antediluvian kings from those who came after becomes not just a story of destruction, but of forgetting. Now imagine holding that prism in your hands, cool clay, the scent of earth and time still lingering on its surface. You run your fingers over the carved numbers, the stylized names. You begin to wonder not whether the names are real, but whether they point to something real. Could these impossibly long reigns represent entire civilizations now erased? Civilizations that rose and fell before Sumer, each one reaching heights we can barely imagine before being swept away by fire. Flood, or forgetting. The idea is unsettling not because it's impossible, but because it feels familiar, like something we've always known but pushed aside, a whisper in the bones. And if that whisper is speaking to you, if you feel the mystery pulling you deeper, pause for a moment. If you're watching this late at night, like so many others who wander into the shadows of deep time, leave a comment below. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. There's something powerful about knowing others are listening across the planet in the same quiet hour. If this story has stirred something in you, share it. Let someone else feel the chill of recognition. And if you want to follow these forgotten paths into deeper mysteries, subscribe. Join others who sense that history doesn't start where the textbooks say it does, that something older waits beneath the surface, and it's calling. And what if the Sumerians knew they were not the first? What if they themselves walked among ruins of an older world, just as we walk through theirs? Their own tablets say it clearly. Kingship was not invented, it descended. Civilization was not born, it returned. Eridu. The first city did not rise by chance. It was chosen, rebuilt on sacred geometry laid out by hands, perhaps more ancient than theirs. The King List doesn't claim a beginning. It suggests a continuation, a relay race through time, where knowledge is passed like a torch between epochs and often dropped. This is what makes the Weld-Blundell prism more than a curiosity. It is a message in a bottle sent across the sea of time. Not a literal history, perhaps, but a symbolic record of a world older than we've been taught to believe. A world that may have existed not just in myth, but in deep time, on coastlines now drowned, in valleys now buried, in memory now faded. It is an invitation to question what we think we know about beginnings, and to consider that history is not a straight line but a spiral, coiling back upon itself. So tonight, as the world quiets and your thoughts begin to drift, let this ancient object speak not just to your rational mind, but to your deeper sense of time. This is for those who lie awake, wondering if the story we've been told is the whole story. For those who feel that beneath the textbooks and timelines, something older waits. Something that calls from clay and echoes through stone. If you have ever looked at the stars and felt that you were part of something immeasurably old, then this story is yours. Because maybe, just maybe, that small prism in a glass case does not tell a myth at all, but a memory. Imagine standing in the burning heat of the Mesopotamian plain, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers once carved a fertile corridor through the ancient world. Now picture a low, dusty mound rising from the earth, unassuming, unmarked, yet beneath it lies one of the oldest cities ever built, Eridu. According to the Sumerians, Eridu was where civilization first descended, not where it began. This subtle difference in wording reveals a profound belief. Kingship, they said, did not emerge from human invention. It was given, it came from the heavens. This belief is etched into the very first line of the Sumerian King List. After kingship descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu, not created, not formed, but descended. Eridu was no myth. Archaeological excavations at the site, known as Tel Abu Sharain in southern Iraq, confirm that this was a real place, layered with temples built and rebuilt across centuries. 17 separate temple foundations were uncovered, each constructed directly atop the ruins of its predecessor. The alignment, the orientation, the dimensions, each preserved with stunning consistency, as if following a sacred blueprint. These were not haphazard constructions. This was devotion, a civilization consciously preserving its spiritual and architectural legacy, and beneath the lowest of these temple layers, something remarkable was discovered, a thick band of clean silt deposited by a flood. This silt layer is not a mythological flourish. It is a geological fingerprint, the unmistakable aftermath of a great inundation. Beneath it, older pottery fragments and habitation evidence suggest there were people here before the flood. Different tools, different styles, different hands shaping the clay. The flood, then, marks not the beginning of civilization, but a rupture between two distinct phases of human history, before and after. Leonard Woolley, the British archaeologist who led extensive excavations at the ancient city of Ur in the 1920s and 30s, found similar flood layers there and in other sites across Sumer Uruk, Kish, Shurapak, not everywhere, but in enough places to suggest a regional catastrophe, likely around 2900 BCE. That timeline, fascinatingly, aligns with the post-Diluvian kings in the King List. The list does not attempt to explain the flood. It simply notes that after it, kingship descended from heaven, again this time to Kish, a city farther north. It's as if the Sumerians were acknowledging that civilization had been interrupted, severed, and then restarted. And yet, the new kings did not possess the longevity of those who came before. They were not immortal. Their reigns, while still long, reflected a diminishing inheritance. Something vital had been lost, and here lies the haunting question. What was lost? Was it simply knowledge, technology, harmony with the natural world, or something more elusive, a spiritual connection, a memory of cosmic origin, an understanding of time and being that we no longer possess? The idea that civilization declined after the flood is not unique to Sumer. Across cultures, we see repeated stories of golden ages followed by collapse, whether by flood, fire, war, or divine punishment. The result is always the same, a humbling fall and a slow rebuilding. The flood is both literal and metaphorical. It represents the washing away of an age, the erasure of one kind of world, and the hesitant beginning of another. The fact that the Sumerians were aware of this divide and recorded it with such conviction suggests that they were not the naive primitives we sometimes imagine. They were curators of memory. They knew they stood upon layers of lost time. Some scholars argue that the King List is a political document intended to legitimize Sumerian dynasties by tracing their authority to a divine source. This may be partly true, but political propaganda does not usually include reigns of 36,000 years or tales of god-kings ruling before a flood. Those are not strategies for asserting power, they are attempts to preserve sacred memory. The scribes were not inventing these stories to justify a throne. They were whispering across the ages, saying, "Remember what came before." The layered temples of Eridu speak this same language. Each generation could have built somewhere new, but they chose to return to the same spot, rebuild on the same axis, lay the same foundations. Why? Because memory mattered. Continuity mattered. To them, the past was not dead. It was a presence, a sacred inheritance to be honored and rebuilt. This act of layering, of constructing anew on ancient ruins, echoes their understanding of civilization itself, that each age is built upon the remnants of the last, that nothing truly begins, everything descends. When we speak of the beginning of civilization, we often point to Sumer with certainty. The first writing, the first cities, the first laws, but the Sumerians themselves did not claim to be the beginning. They saw themselves as inheritors. This humility, this awareness of a deeper past, challenges our modern sense of progress. We believe we are the most advanced civilization yet. The Sumerians believed the greatest civilizations were already lost. Perhaps the most powerful idea embedded in the King List is that civilization is not linear. It is not a staircase climbing ever upward. It is a wave rising, cresting, and crashing. The list doesn't just record kings. It records memory's contraction. It tells of ages when kings ruled for tens of thousands of years, possibly meaning civilizations that endured for millennia only to be wiped clean by water. Then came shorter ages, shorter reigns, smaller achievements. The list is a funerary chant for forgotten greatness. When we read the King List, or gaze at the layered ruins of Eridu, we are not just observing history. We are confronting a cultural memory too vast for modern categories. This was not archaeology for them, it was sacred continuity. The list begins with divine descent. It marks the flood not as punishment, but as punctuation. It resumes with a new kind of kingship, less eternal, more fragile. It is as though humanity was given another chance, and knew it. And that should give us pause. Because if the King List is right, if civilization does not begin, but returns, then we, too, are part of a cycle. We may be Sumer to some future people. Our flood may be coming. And the question we must ask is not whether we will survive, but whether we will leave something worth rebuilding upon. The Sumerians left clay tablets. They left stories, structures, myths. They left memory. What will we leave? There is a temptation, when we encounter ancient texts filled with implausible numbers, to wave them away with a dismissive smile. Surely, we think, no one actually believed that a king could live for 36,000 years. Surely, those are exaggerations, or mistakes, or allegories too obscure to decipher. But such interpretations often say more about our modern biases than they do about ancient minds. We live in a world of literalism, of exact measurements and rational analysis. To ancient peoples, time was not a straight line, stretching from a defined past into a predictable future. Time was something sacred, cyclical, and alive. The Sumerians did not view their king list as a timeline in the modern sense. It was a sacred record, compressed and encoded. In many ways, it functioned more like myth than history, yet myth itself was not fiction. Myth was how ancient societies preserved meaning, passed knowledge through the generations, and interpreted the forces that shaped their world. When the King List tells us that Alulim ruled for 28,800 years, perhaps it is not describing a person at all. Perhaps it is naming an epoch, just as we speak of the Victorian Age or the Renaissance, as though they were shaped by singular personalities. The Sumerians may have understood their early kings as symbols of entire ages of human development. This symbolic compression of time is not unique to Sumer. We do it all the time. We call the 20th century the American century. Even though no single narrative could capture its complexity, we say the Dark Ages, and immediately imagine plague and superstition. Despite the diversity of life across those centuries, we reduce vast spans of time into names, eras, figures. Our textbooks do it. Our language does it. The ancients did it too. The difference is that they recognized the cosmic scale of such compressions. They didn't limit their histories to kingdoms and conquests. They framed them in relation to the heavens, to the stars, to the great turning of ages. For them, a king was more than a ruler. A king was a bridge between the earthly and the divine. Kingship was a cosmic role. The king stood at the axis of time, responsible for maintaining harmony between human society and the divine order. So when a Sumerian scribe wrote that Alaljar reigned for 36,000 years, it may have meant that for 36 millennia, a particular cosmic order held sway, a rhythm of civilization, a pattern of life, persisted. And then it changed. The next king was not just a man. He was the embodiment of a new age. This way of thinking about time is mirrored in many other ancient traditions. The Egyptian concept of Zeptepi, the first time, describes a golden era when gods ruled and divine order reigned supreme. In Chinese mythology, the mandate of heaven was not fixed. It could be lost if rulers fell into chaos. And time itself would fracture. In these systems, a shift in kingship wasn't just political, it was metaphysical. It was a resetting of the world's balance. A shift in the rhythm of the cosmos. Time was lived, not measured. Even the structure of the king list reveals this layered symbolism. The exact reign lengths of the antediluvian kings are often round multiples of 60 or 3600 numbers deeply sacred in the Sumerian sexagesimal system. These were not arbitrary figures. They were cosmologically significant. The Sumerians counted in base 60, a mathematical system that still shapes how we measure time today. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. These units were not just practical, they were spiritual, drawn from celestial observation and woven into the very structure of their worldview. So when modern scholars dismiss the king list as a jumble of impossibilities, they may be missing the point. The list may not be trying to tell us exactly how long each king ruled in the way we count years. It may be telling us something far deeper, that there were vast ages of order, of stability, of connection to something greater, and that those ages ended, that the flood marked a profound rupture not just in the land, but in time itself. Afterward, everything was smaller, shorter, more fragile. The long reigns of the early kings were not about longevity, but about continuity. After the flood, continuity was broken. The king list thus becomes a kind of funeral hymn for cosmic memory, a list not just of rulers, but of forgotten harmonies. Each number, each name, each city holds the weight of an entire worldview. We may never fully understand what those reigns meant to the scribes who etched them in clay, but we can recognize the pattern, a reverence for deep time, a memory of greatness lost, a longing to preserve what little remained. And perhaps that's why the numbers matter so much. If the king list were purely symbolic, why not simply say a very long time? Why record exact reign lengths like 21,000 years or 18,600? The precision suggests that these were not merely metaphors, but measurements of something we no longer know how to interpret, whether they tracked lunar cycles, dynastic phases, or celestial events. They were chosen with intent, sacred intent. There is a kind of awe in considering this. A king as an era, a name as a symbol, a reign as a world. The King List becomes more than a historical document. It becomes a time capsule of consciousness, a snapshot of how an entire civilization understood its place in the vast dance of the cosmos. And when we read it, we're not just reading about kings, we're peering into an ancient mind, one that saw history not as a linear narrative, but as a sacred rhythm echoing through eternity. In that rhythm, we may recognize something familiar, the sense that our age, too, is part of a larger cycle, that we are not the pinnacle, but a moment, that the line we think we are drawing forward may one day be seen as just another spiral, curling back into the great unknown. The King List doesn't just tell us about the past. It invites us to reconsider time itself, not as a ruler's calendar, but as a living, breathing memory of the world. The Sumerian King List may be the oldest surviving record of pre-flood rulers, but it is far from the only ancient source to describe a world divided into vast, descending ages, from India to Greece, from Scandinavia to Mesoamerica. Civilizations separated by oceans and millennia all seem to echo the same pattern. They speak of golden beginnings, of long-lived peoples in harmony with the cosmos, of a great rupture, often a flood, and then of successive ages marked by decline. These aren't just stories, they're maps of memory, layered with mathematics, morality, and a haunting sense of something lost. In ancient India, this memory survives in the doctrine of the yugas, 4 immense epochs through which the world cycles endlessly. The first, Satya Yuga, is the age of truth, when humans are virtuous, long-lived, and in perfect harmony with Dharma, the cosmic order. Treta Yuga follows, slightly diminished in morality and lifespan. Then Dvapara Yuga, where virtue wanes further and people live shorter lives. Finally comes Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, the one in which we are said to live today. Here, ignorance dominates. Spiritual connection is lost, and human lifespan is reduced to a mere fraction of what it once was. Each yuga is shorter than the last. Each decline is inevitable, and at the end of Kali Yuga, the cycle resets. A new Satya Yuga dawns. The wheel turns once more. The Sumerian King List and the Hindu Yuga system share a spine-chilling symmetry. Both describe a long, golden age followed by a dramatic flood or cataclysm. Both show a progressive shortening of lifespans and reigns after this event. Both imply a cyclical view of time, not a straight road, but a wheel grinding through the ages. The Sumerians say kingship descended again after the flood. The Hindus say truth will descend again after darkness. In both, there is hope, but only after the pattern completes its descent. Now turn westward, to ancient Greece. The poet Hesiod, writing in the 8th century BCE, described 5 ages of man. First came the Golden Age, when humans lived like gods, free from toil, in peace and prosperity. Then the Silver Age, still noble, but with flaws beginning to emerge. The Bronze Age followed strong and warlike, where men began to crave conquest. Then came the Heroic Age, a brief reprieve filled with legendary deeds. And finally, the Iron Age, the present age, marked by suffering, injustice, and decline. Hesiod lamented being born in such a time, expressing a longing for a past when men were better, to wiser, and closer to the divine. These patterns, long ages of peace and wisdom followed by decline, reappear in Norse myth as well. The Norse told of Yggdrasil, the world tree that binds together 9 realms. In time, it too will wither. Then comes Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, a cataclysm of fire, flood, and chaos, and yet even this end is not final. From the ashes, a new world will arise, green and pure, and survivors will repopulate the earth. The cycle renews, the wheel turns. In Zoroastrian cosmology, we find another structured chronology. Time is divided into 4 great epochs, each lasting 3,000 years. At the end of 12,000 years, a saviour figure will arise. The dead will be resurrected, and the world will be perfected. Time, in this view, does not repeat endlessly, but it moves in purposeful stages, each one declining from the last until redemption is achieved. Even in this linear-seeming view, the idea of successive ages, of spiritual decline, and of ultimate renewal remains central. In the Americas, echoes of this universal pattern appear again. The Aztecs believed they lived in the 5th sun, the 5th world age. The previous 4 had each ended in catastrophic destruction. Jaguars, wind, air, fire, and floods. Each time, the gods reset creation. The current age, they believed, would end in earthquakes. The Mayans, likewise, had an extraordinarily complex calendrical system rooted in long cycles. The long count calendar that caused modern anxiety in 2012 was not a doomsday device, but a marker of the end of a Baktun, a cycle of 125 years. Yet even this was just one small wheel within larger ones. Above the Baktun was the Pictun. Above that, cycles of hundreds of thousands, even millions of years. The Mayans were not counting history, they were listening to the rhythms of the cosmos. Skeptics often explain these commonalities as cultural projection. They say humans everywhere experience floods, disasters, and decline. We all age. We all see our societies change and fear that younger generations are less virtuous. We turn those fears into myth. This explanation has merit, but it doesn't quite account for the specificity of the patterns. The structure of the yugas, with precise ratios 4, 3, 2, 1 is mirrored in the shrinking reigns of the Sumerian kings. The ages of man in Greece mirror the same descent: gold, silver, bronze, iron in Mesopotamia, India, Greece, and Mesoamerica. The progression always moves the same direction, from vast, luminous ages into smaller, darker ones, then perhaps a cleansing, a reset. Why would so many unconnected civilizations tell the same story, not just of a flood, but of a cycle, of a fall, of a return? Could it be that they all inherited fragments of a shared memory one passed down orally for thousands of years before writing existed? A cultural echo of a deep, prehistoric truth? Perhaps these weren't symbolic metaphors at first, but accounts of real experiences civilizations lost to time, remembered only through the language of gods and kings. There is something both humbling and terrifying in this possibility. If the ancients were right, if history is a series of cycles, then we are not climbing a ladder to infinite progress. We are turning on a great wheel. Each rise carries within it the seed of its fall. Each fall, the seed of rebirth. And if these cycles are real, then our own age, this modern world of satellites and cities, of data and denial, may not be the apex we imagine. It may be the twilight of another age, the end of one sun, the beginning of the next. Yet there is also hope in the cycle, because cycles do not simply repeat, they evolve. The same patterns, yes, but each turn of the wheel carries something forward, some knowledge preserved, some wisdom remembered, and so we are not doomed to forget. We are given a choice to listen to the stories our ancestors preserved, to understand what they tried to encode in clay, in myth, in song, to break the cycle not by stopping time, but by learning its rhythm and dancing differently. Water, the symbol of life, is also the agent of erasure. Across every inhabited continent, cultures that never spoke the same language or shared the same gods all tell a version of the same tale. The world was once destroyed by flood. From the Epic of Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia to the Matsya Purana in India, from the story of Deucalion in Greece to the Ojibwe tales of Turtle Island in North America, the pattern persists. A world teeming with people, a growing corruption or imbalance, a divine decision, a warning, a chosen survivor, a boat, the rising of water, the drowning of all, and then rebirth. This is not a coincidence of storytelling. It is an echo of trauma. In Sumer, the oldest known flood story is that of Ziusudra, a pious king warned by the god Enki that a council of deities had resolved to flood the earth. Enki, defying the decision, instructs Ziusudra to build a great vessel. When the flood arrives, it lasts for 7 days and nights, wiping away all other life. Afterward, Ziusudra offers a sacrifice and is granted immortality, living forever in the paradise of Dilmun. Later, this tale is retold in the Akkadian Epic of Gilgamesh with Utnapishtim as the flood survivor. The details vary slightly, but the essence remains. In the Atrahasis epic, another Mesopotamian version, the gods send the flood not for moral failings, but because humanity has become too noisy. The gods cannot sleep. Plague and famine are tried first, but humanity endures. Finally, a flood is chosen. Again, Enki warns a single man. Again, a boat. Again, survival. Again, a regret. The gods decide to limit population through mortality rather than annihilation. This is no random myth, it is a reflection of a civilization trying to understand why its past was erased, why death was introduced, why humanity is no longer divine. These Mesopotamian stories were likely the source material for the biblical account of Noah. The parallels are striking. A chosen man, a great boat, animals in pairs, 40 days of rain, a raven and a dove, a mountaintop landing, and a sacrifice afterward. But the story of a global deluge is not confined to the Fertile Crescent. In India, the Matsya Purana tells of Manu, warned by Vishnu in the form of a fish that a great flood is coming. Manu builds a boat, ties it to the horn of the fish, and rides out the deluge. Afterward, he becomes the progenitor of the human race. The structure mirrors the Mesopotamian tales with uncanny precision. In Greek mythology, Zeus decides to wipe out humanity for its wickedness. Prometheus warns his son Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha, who build a chest, essentially a boat, and survive the flood. They land on Mount Parnassus and repopulate the world by throwing stones over their shoulders, which transform into people. The myth blends destruction with recreation. In Norse myth, The flood takes the form of blood. The world is born from the death of the primordial giant Ymir, whose blood drowns all but 2 frost giants who survive to restart the world. In each version, the flood is not merely a punishment, it is a reset, a restart, a memory that something came before, and something must come after. China's mythologies contain flood legends too. The tale of Yu the Great tells of a time when floodwaters covered the land. Rather than building a boat, Yu tames the floods through years of labour digging canals, redirecting rivers, restoring balance. His story is one of survival through action rather than escape. In Australia, Aboriginal groups speak of waters rising from the south, flooding coastal regions, changing the shape of the land. The narratives preserve the memory of vanished shorelines. In South America, the Inca told of a flood that destroyed earlier peoples before the god Viracocha emerged to create a new race. Why do so many flood stories exist? The standard explanation is that floods are universal experiences. Rivers overflow, monsoons come, tsunamis strike. Naturally, people remember these events and mythologize them. But this explanation falls short when confronted with the scale, similarity, and centrality of these stories. These are not tales of local disasters. They describe global destruction, moral judgment, the survival of a remnant, and the founding of a new world. They encode moral messages, cosmological reset, and metaphysical truths. They describe the ending and restarting of time. Perhaps the most compelling clue comes from geology. Around 12,000 years ago, the last ice age ended. Massive ice sheets that had covered continents melted rapidly, releasing unimaginable volumes of water. Sea levels rose by over 300 feet. Vast stretches of coastal land, where early humans likely thrived, were submerged. This event, Meltwater Pulse 1A, occurred over centuries. But for those living through it, it would have seemed apocalyptic. Villages swallowed by rising seas, forests turning into lakes, islands disappearing. If a civilization had developed along those ancient coasts, its memory would have drowned with it. Today, much of that ancient coastline lies underwater, beyond the reach of conventional archaeology, but hints remain. Submerged structures off the coasts of India, Japan, and the Caribbean suggest that something once stood where now only fish swim. These are controversial sites, dismissed by some as natural formations, but their symmetry, right angles, and alignment invite speculation. If even one of them proves to be artificial, the implications are staggering. It would mean humans were building in stone long before Sumer, and that the flood stories are not myth but memory. This is the great possibility that lingers behind every flood tale, that ancient civilizations were not only real, but global, that they were destroyed not by divine wrath, but by climate, by shifting seas, by events beyond their control, and that the survivors, scattered and few, carried forward not technology, but stories. Stories that became sacred, stories that were told and retold, encoded in myth and scripture, passed on not for entertainment but for preservation. What survives a flood? Not books, not cities, not machines. Stories, oral traditions, memories shaped into myth. When the world ends, the survivors sing. They sing of what was lost, of what must be remembered, of what cannot happen again. This is what flood myths are. Not fantasies, not exaggerations, but memory in the only form that could survive, water destroys, story preserves, and perhaps that is the greatest lesson of the flood archetype, that no matter how high the waters rise, some truths can float, some voices echo, some memories endure not in data, not in stone, but in the human soul, waiting to be heard again. Roughly 12,000 years ago, the earth woke from a long, frozen sleep. The last ice age, which had endured for tens of thousands of years, was ending. Vast glaciers that once stretched across North America, Northern Europe, and Asia began to melt, their ancient weight lifting from the land. The change was neither gentle nor slow in geological terms. It was sudden, it was violent, and it altered the face of the earth forever. This period, known as Meltwater Pulse 1A, saw sea levels rise dramatically more than 300 feet in just a few centuries. To the humans who lived then, scattered across valleys, river basins, and coastal plains, the world itself was drowning. Imagine it, a shoreline where families had fished for generations, swallowed by the sea. Entire landscapes transformed in a single lifetime. Islands vanishing, rivers changing course, freshwater lakes turning brackish, forests submerged, sacred places lost forever. Those who survived would have fled inland, disoriented and grieving, forced to adapt to a new world. If there had been any settled communities along those ancient coasts, and evidence suggests there may have been, they would have been obliterated, their ruins buried beneath layers of sediment and salt water, inaccessible to most modern archaeological tools. Today, most of our archaeological understanding of ancient humanity comes from sites located well inland. This creates a kind of blind spot. We may be missing critical evidence simply because we're not looking where the oldest civilizations may have once stood on now submerged coastlines. And yet, the hints persist. All around the world, submerged ruins tease us with the possibility of forgotten ages. Off the coast of Japan lies the Yonaguni Monument, a series of massive stone formations under the sea, discovered in the 1980s. Some scientists insist they are natural formations, the result of tectonic shifts and erosion. Others argue that the sharp angles, flat surfaces, and what appear to be carved steps suggest human craftsmanship. If it is artificial, the site would have to be at least 10,000 years old, dating it to the end of the Ice Age, a time when mainstream archaeology insists that only hunter-gatherers roamed the earth. Farther west, off the coast of India, near the city of Dwarka, divers have discovered submerged structures, pillars, walls, streets beneath the Arabian Sea. Radiocarbon dating of recovered artifacts suggests they are more than 9,000 years old. Indian texts, like the Mahabharata, describe ancient cities destroyed by rising waters and celestial wars. Are these just myths, or do they preserve the fading memories of real drowned cities? In the Indonesian highlands stands Gunung Padang, a megalithic site shrouded in jungle mist and academic controversy. The visible terraces date to around 5000 BCE, already older than the pyramids. But some geological studies claim deeper layers of the site could be as much as 20,000 years old. If true, it would rewrite human history. Mainstream archaeologists urge caution, pointing to the lack of peer-reviewed consensus. Still, the site's sheer complexity raises questions that cannot easily be dismissed. And then there is Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, a site that has already forced scholars to reconsider the timeline of civilization, built around 9,500 BCE. It consists of massive stone pillars arranged in circular enclosures, many weighing over 15 tons and adorned with intricate carvings of animals and symbols. At the time of its construction, humans were supposedly still nomadic hunter-gatherers. Yet here we find monumental architecture, coordinated labour, artistic sophistication. Even more astonishing is that the site was deliberately buried around 8000 BCE. Someone intentionally preserved it, sealing it under tons of earth, as if they knew it needed to be protected for who, or for what. We may never know. What do these sites have in common? They all challenge the standard narrative of linear human development, that we evolved from foragers to farmers to builders in a steady, step-by-step climb toward complexity. But the existence of these anomalies suggests another possibility, that advanced cultures may have existed earlier than we thought, flourished briefly, and were then lost, erased not by time alone, but by the rising waters of a changing planet. If there were civilizations during the Ice Age, their remains would now lie hundreds of feet beneath the ocean, their stone buildings cracked and softened by salt, their wood and fabric long since dissolved. Without monumental stonework, we might never know they existed, and even then, we might mistake their ruins for natural rock formations, as we often do. The sea does not easily give up its secrets, but the stories persist. Indigenous traditions from across the globe speak of lands lost to the sea. In the Pacific, the memory of Lemuria. In the Atlantic, Atlantis. While these are often treated as pure legend, perhaps they are cultural fossils distorted, mythologized memories of real places, swallowed by rising tides. Oral traditions have extraordinary longevity, especially when tied to trauma. The drowning of a homeland would be passed down for generations, becoming sacred, becoming myth. We are only now beginning to map the underwater landscapes of our planet with the technology necessary to explore these submerged shelves. LIDAR, sonar, and satellite imaging reveal riverbeds and settlements now drowned beneath the sea. But the process is slow, and the ocean is vast. Most of Earth's prehistoric coastlines remain unexplored, and so our picture of early human civilization remains incomplete, drawn only from the 30% of the Earth not covered by ocean. All of this invites us to consider the King List and the flood myths with new eyes. Perhaps the Sumerians were not speaking in symbols alone. Perhaps they remembered something preserved through thousands of years of oral tradition before being etched into clay. Not just a symbolic flood, but a real one. Not just a mythical past, but a buried one. The end of the Ice Age was a global event. It happened everywhere, to everyone, and yet no unified record survives, only the scattered shards of story, stone and myth. But those shards speak. They tell us that what we know is not all there is, that under the seas may lie the ruins of forgotten chapters in the human story, that our ancestors may have known more, built more, and lost more than we dare to imagine. The earth forgets slowly, but water remembers. If the ancient flood myths hold the memory of a catastrophe that ended a forgotten world, then the Sumerian King List may preserve the sequence of what came before the rise of civilizations that predated even Sumer. The list opens with 8 antediluvian kings whose reigns span over 200,000 years. These kings, Alulim, Alaljar, Enmenluan, and others, are often dismissed as fantasy. But what if they are placeholders for entire epochs, ages of growth, invention, decline, and loss? In this interpretation, Each king becomes a symbol, a marker of a civilization whose name we've forgotten, but whose legacy echoes in myth, math, and memory. Let us imagine, then, the age of Alulim as the first rise, not an empire in the modern sense, but the slow convergence of scattered tribes into settled life. Humans begin to plant, to store, to tame animals. Villages form along rivers. Fire becomes a tool for landscape management. Oral traditions deepen. These people do not yet build in stone, but they watch the stars and carve symbols into bone and shell. They map the seasons. Time itself becomes a rhythm. Slowly, their settlements grow. Trade begins. Culture emerges from survival. Then comes the age of Al-Aljar, the second rise. Settlements become towns. Agriculture becomes a science. People build granaries, walls, temples of wood and clay. Trade networks spread obsidian, shells, pigments across hundreds of miles. Social hierarchies form. Perhaps early experiments with governance and leadership emerge. Some people begin to specialize: priests, artists, record keepers. Stories become more structured. Rituals are codified. Time is marked not only by sun and moon, but by events, floods, harvests, dynastic changes. Over the next 6 kings, or epochs, civilization continues its climb. Monumental architecture appears: megalithic sites like Göbekli Tepe, stone alignments tracking the stars, circles carved from massive limestone pillars. Astronomy becomes religion. Mathematics becomes sacred. Oral knowledge is passed down with meticulous care. Civilization, in these early forms, reaches heights we may never fully understand. Their artifacts may have been made of wood, clay, and fiber materials long vanished, but their knowledge of the skies, of seasons, of land, speaks of generations of observation and stability. And yet, even these early civilizations are not immune to collapse. Perhaps it is climate that strikes first. The end of the Ice Age brings chaos, melting glaciers, rising seas, disrupted ecosystems. Then come migrations, resource shortages, disease. A great flood, the memory of which is preserved in stories around the world, sweeps away not just people, but the continuity of knowledge. Temples are buried, cities abandoned, oral traditions fragment. The great chain of memory is broken. Only the fragments remain. And so begins the long, slow climb again. This post-flood world is the one we recognize. The world of Sumer, of Eridu and Uruk, where writing emerges, etched into clay. But even in this first civilization, the Sumerians themselves say they are not first. They are inheritors. The kingship they claim descended from heaven once more. This new phase of civilization begins smaller. The reigns are still long, hundreds of years, but shorter than before, as if knowledge, power, and memory have diminished. Yet something is retained: sacred geometry, agricultural techniques, perhaps even myths that encode the memory of the lost world. Consider how myths often preserve technology and philosophy without appearing to do so. The story of the gods may hide the story of astronomy. A tale of a golden age might record a time of abundance and order. A flood myth might preserve the memory of sea level rise and migration. These stories are not primitive, they are survival tools, time capsules disguised as parable. And the new civilizations that arise after the flood carry these stories forward. Over time, the pattern repeats. Civilizations rise, Knowledge accumulates. Cities flourish. Then something happens: war, drought, internal corruption, collapse returns. The survivors rebuild again. Each time, some knowledge is lost, some is preserved. Each new age is shaped not just by innovation, but by memory, true or distorted. This is the rhythm of civilization, the breath of human progress. Inhale, rise. Exhale, fall. We see this not only in the King List, but in real history. The Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE devastated the Mediterranean. Great cities fell. Trade routes vanished. Writing systems disappeared. The cause? A convergence of drought, war, earthquakes, and possibly mass migration. The sea peoples, mysterious invaders, burned cities and shattered empires. What followed was a dark age lasting centuries. But from that darkness rose the classical civilizations. Greece, home, Persia, each one, knowingly or not, building upon the ruins of what came before. Even Rome, the great empire of roads and laws, fell to internal decay and external pressure. The Western Roman Empire collapsed, plunging Europe into fragmentation and chaos. Yet monks preserved books. Oral traditions survived in remote villages, and centuries later, the Renaissance dawned a rebirth built upon old roots. Always, the pattern holds. What is lost is never lost entirely. What is remembered becomes the seed of the future. And so, when we read the Sumerian King List and see reigns measured in thousands of years, perhaps we are not meant to take the numbers literally. Perhaps we are meant to recognize the pattern, that there were civilizations before us, that they rose, peaked, and fell, that we are not the beginning. We are another iteration, another link in the chain. This understanding changes how we see ourselves. We often imagine we stand at the summit of human progress. That history led inevitably to us. But if the pattern of rise and fall is real, then we are not the peak, we are a point. One arc in the turning wheel, and the wheel may turn again. What matters, then, is not how high we rise, but what we preserve. What knowledge survives the next fall? What stories we pass forward to the next builders? The King List may be a strange and ancient document, but its wisdom endures. Civilizations are fragile. Memory is sacred. And the rise and fall of humanity is not a singular event. It is a rhythm, a breath, a cycle. By now, a pattern has begun to take shape. It whispers through flood myths, hides in astronomical alignments, lingers in the impossible reigns of ancient kings. It's a pattern not of a single forgotten civilization, but of many. If the Sumerians were right, if the kings before the flood were not literal men but markers of entire epochs, then we must consider the possibility that we are not the first advanced civilization. We may not even be the second. We might be the 7th or the 70th. The idea of multiple lost civilizations is not new, but it remains controversial. It runs counter to the dominant narrative of linear human progress, the belief that humanity emerged from the caves, invented agriculture, and has been climbing upward ever since. But this neat arc fails to account for one glaring fact. Humans, anatomically identical to us, have existed for at least 200,000 years. That's 20 times longer than all of recorded history. What were we doing all that time? The standard answer is not much. Small bands of foragers, some stone tools, a few cave paintings. But is it really plausible that humans who looked like us, thought like us, and dreamed like us did nothing of lasting complexity for over 90% of our existence? Or is it more likely that some of them did build, that they organized, discovered, created, and that their achievements were simply washed away? When we look at what remains after a collapse, the evidence is sobering. Organic materials vanish quickly. Wood rots. Cloth disintegrates. Leather turns to dust. Even stone structures, unless monumental and carefully preserved, erode into unrecognizability after 10 or 20,000 years. If a civilization flourished 30,000 years ago and was then destroyed by flood, war, volcano, or disease, what would remain? A few anomalous stones, a myth, a number etched into a clay tablet thousands of years later. A king who reigned for 36,000 years. Our ancestors may have walked among the ruins of such forgotten worlds. Imagine a young Sumerian herder stumbling across a hill, really the collapsed dome of a buried temple. New context. No inscriptions, just a sense that something massive and important once stood there. That memory, passed down orally, would morph into legend. Legends become mythology, and mythology becomes the blueprint for sacred texts. The story survives. The details do not. We see evidence of this kind of generational storytelling all over the world. In Egypt, the priests of Sais told Solon, according to Plato, that the Greeks were children in soul because they remembered only the last flood. The Egyptians, they claimed, remembered many. They spoke of earlier civilizations wiped away, and of survivors who carried fragments forward. Plato took this story and created the tale of Atlantis, an advanced island society destroyed in a single day and night of catastrophe. Dismissed as allegory by most, it still resonates, because it mirrors other flood narratives with uncanny precision. Even in the Bible, there is an echo of cycles. Before Noah's flood, the book of Genesis lists patriarchs who lived for hundreds of years: Methuselah, Lamech, Jared. Their lifespans declined steadily after the flood, just like the Sumerian kings. These are not isolated coincidences. They are recurring motifs, traces of something deeper, a collective memory that spans geography, language, and time. Let's imagine for a moment what one of these lost civilizations might have looked like. Not a global digital society like ours, but a regional network of city-states. They use stone, not steel. Their technology is practical, rooted in astronomy and agriculture. They know how to read the stars, how to predict eclipses, how to navigate rivers and seas. They trade obsidian, copper, salt, and herbs. Their priests memorize vast oral epics. Their builders understand geometry. Perhaps they even begin experimenting with early forms of writing marks on bark, knots on string, pigments on hide. Then disaster strikes. A comet, an eruption, a superstorm. Within a generation, they are gone. Survivors flee inland, carrying only what they can remember, and slowly, those memories become myth. In this context, even anomalies begin to make sense. Why does Newgrange in Ireland align so precisely with the winter solstice sunrise? If it was built over 5,000 years ago by primitive farmers, why does the Great Pyramid encode the value of pi, the golden ratio, and astronomical constants? Why do so many ancient sites align with cardinal directions or track the solstices and equinoxes with uncanny precision? These may not be the inventions of their builders, but inheritances copied from older, now lost traditions Some researchers have begun compiling lists of these anomalies: impossible architecture, out-of-place artifacts, unexplained knowledge. Most are dismissed by mainstream archaeology as coincidence, fraud, or misunderstanding, and indeed, many are, but not all. A handful resist easy explanation, and taken together, they suggest that human history may be deeper, more cyclical, and more tragic than we currently believe. This isn't to suggest a conspiracy. Mainstream archaeologists are not hiding the truth. They are working with what can be proven, as they should. The challenge is that proof requires preservation, and time erases almost everything. The deeper the past, the fewer the traces. And so, the story of earlier civilizations survives not in stone, but in story, not in tools, but in timelines that don't make sense unless we accept that memory sometimes outlasts evidence. If we are the seventh civilization, then the previous six may still be speaking to us in dreams, in myths, in impossible numbers written on ancient clay. Perhaps each one rose as high as it could, faced collapse, and left behind what little it could preserve: seeds, symbols, stories. And perhaps that's the point. That memory, not technology, is the true currency of survival. When we dig into the earth and find traces of the Sumerians, we marvel at their achievements, their writing, their cities, their understanding of time. But the Sumerians were already looking backward. They told us plainly, we are not the first. Kingship came before. The flood came before. And then we came. What if that statement wasn't mythic flourish, but simple fact? The ancient world didn't think of time the way we do. Today, we picture time as an arrow, a straight line moving from past to future, from primitive to advanced, from ignorance to knowledge. We divide it into centuries, assign numbers to events, and catalogue progress as though history is a ladder we climb. But across the ancient world, a different vision prevailed. Time as a circle, not endlessly repetitive, but rhythmic, like breath. A great cycle of rise and fall, birth and death, collapse and rebirth. This cyclical concept is more than metaphor. It is embedded in the myths, calendars, and cosmologies of civilizations that had no contact with each other, yet somehow reached the same conclusion. In Hindu cosmology, the Yuga cycle is perhaps the most detailed and ambitious vision of cyclical time. 4 ages, Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dvapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga descend in moral and spiritual quality. The first, a golden age of truth, lasts the longest. Each successive age is shorter and darker. The Kali Yuga, our present age, is the shortest and most chaotic. At its end, the world is destroyed and renewed. The full cycle, called a Mahayuga, spans over 4 million years. And 1,000 Mahayugas make up one day of Brahma, the creator god whose lifespan is 100 of these divine days. It's a vision of time so vast it dwarfs even our cosmological models. Yet, within that scale is a profound pattern, a world that repeats itself, but also evolves. This view is mirrored in other traditions. The Mayan calendar operates on multiple interlocking cycles. The best known is the Baktun cycle, roughly 5,125 years long. 13 Baktuns make a full cycle, which the Maya called a world age. The end of one cycle is not the end of the world, but the end of an era, a time of renewal and recalibration. Beyond the Baktun, the Maya tracked even larger spans, Pictuns, Kalabtuns, Alautun's cycles lasting tens of thousands to millions of years. Their calendar was not just a system of dates, it was a map of time's breath, inhaling and exhaling through the ages. The Greeks saw time in a similar way. Hesiod's 5 ages of man charted a descent from the Golden Age to the Iron Age, echoing the Yugas. But in later Platonic thought, time was governed by the Great Year, a massive cycle tied to the precession of the equinoxes. This astronomical phenomenon, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, takes approximately 25,920 years to complete. Plato suggested that after each great year, the heavens returned to their original position and history. In some sense, restarted. The Stoics believed in ekpyrosis, the idea that the universe is periodically consumed by fire and reborn anew. Science, surprisingly, now acknowledges similar patterns. The precession of the equinoxes is real, measurable, and significant. It alters which stars mark our seasons. It may subtly influence climate, ecosystems, even human culture over long spans. Geological records show repeated extinction events, ice ages, warming periods, and recoveries. Civilization itself seems to follow cycles. The rise and fall of empires, the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Egyptians, Greeks. Romans all follow a familiar rhythm: growth, expansion, overreach, collapse. Even in our own era, historians and economists have observed recurring cycles. The Kondrativ wave suggests a 50 to 60 year economic rhythm driven by technological innovation and collapse. The Turchin model, developed by evolutionary anthropologist Peter Turchin, charts cycles of social instability in large societies, predicting periods of upheaval followed by restabilization. Turchin's model eerily predicted a spike in global instability around the early 2020s, long before the data was visible to most. This convergence between ancient myth and modern science is worth noting. When ancient peoples said, "This has happened before," we dismissed it as metaphor. But what if it wasn't? What if they were right? Not about every detail, not about gods with lightning and floods summoned by divine councils, but about the deeper truth, that human civilization is not a straight path, but a spiral, that the future is shaped by forgotten pasts. That knowledge is not always cumulative, but cyclical, gained, lost, rediscovered, and lost again. The implications are profound. If we are part of a cycle, then we must accept that collapse is not an aberration, but a feature of the system. It doesn't mean giving up, it means preparing, learning from what came before. It means recognizing the signs: ecological exhaustion, overpopulation, inequality, lost meaning. These are not new problems. They are the conditions that ended past civilizations. We are not the first to face them. The question is, will we be the first to face them wisely? Because cycles do not mean repetition without change. Each turn of the wheel is different. The fall of Rome was not the same as the collapse of the Bronze Age. The Black Death did not destroy Europe, but forced its transformation. And the next collapse, if one comes, will be different still, perhaps more global, more technological, more sudden, but perhaps, too, more conscious. We know more than any previous civilization. We've read their records, we've decoded their myths, we've measured their failures. We have tools they did not. We also have vulnerabilities they didn't. Our world is interconnected in ways unimaginable to the ancients. A disruption in one region reverberates everywhere. A virus, a war, a blackout, a crop failure. It doesn't just affect a city, it affects the globe. Our systems are efficient but fragile, powerful but brittle. In a cyclical model of time, this is the moment of maximum complexity just before the turn. But knowledge, if preserved, can break the pattern, not by stopping the cycle, but by softening the fall, by preparing the next rise. Ancient civilizations may have tried to do this. The Sumerians preserved the King List. The Egyptians built monuments aligned to the stars. The Maya carved time into stone. The Hindus encoded vast cosmologies in sacred texts. These were not acts of superstition alone. They were warnings. They were messages. They were maps. And now, it is our turn to ask, what are we preserving? What are we encoding? Are we leaving wisdom or only data? Are we planting seeds for the next cycle or racing toward the edge? Assuming we are exempt from history's breath, the Sumerian King List, with its impossible numbers and forgotten kings, may be more than a curiosity. It may be a survivor's record, a memory of cycles, a lesson that the rise is always followed by a fall, and that after the fall, those who remember can build again. When civilizations collapse, most of what they created is lost. Wood rots, metals corrode, parchment burns, languages die, but some things endure. Across the world, long after the people who built them vanished, stones remain, monuments carved with care, aligned with stars, oriented toward solstices, structures that seem to whisper across the ages, not with words, but with presence. They were built to last, not just as shelters or tombs, but as messages, silent, massive, mysterious. Time capsules made of stone, the Great Pyramid of Giza stands as one of the most iconic of these messages. Built over 4,500 years ago, it is the last surviving wonder of the ancient world. Its construction remains a marvel, not because we don't understand how it was built, but because of the precision and intent behind it. The pyramid's sides align almost perfectly with the cardinal directions. Its dimensions encode mathematical relationships that hint at an understanding of pi and the golden ratio. Its internal shafts align with stars as they would have appeared in ancient skies. These features suggest that it was not just a tomb, it was a cosmic marker, a permanent structure designed to outlive empire. In language, and even religion, and it did. Empires rose and fell. Pharaohs became dust. Yet the pyramid remained. Watching the stars, it was built to reflect. For thousands of years, travelers stood before it and wondered. Some said it was a storehouse of knowledge. Others claimed it was a divine calendar. Still others saw it as proof of contact with beings from the stars. Whatever the truth, the pyramid succeeded in its purpose. It made us remember. Elsewhere, we find similar structures performing similar roles. In Ireland, Newgrange is older than the pyramids. Built over 5,000 years ago, it is a passage tomb carefully aligned with the rising sun of the winter solstice. Once a year, a beam of light pierces the darkness and illuminates the inner chamber. For 17 minutes, the past speaks through light. This was not accidental. The builders were tracking time, not with clocks, but with stone. They knew the cycle of the year, the turning of the sun, the rhythm of life, and they encoded that knowledge not in books, but in architecture. In England, Stonehenge rises from the plains like a stone skeleton of forgotten beliefs. It tracks the solstices. It marks the passage of time. And though we still debate its exact purpose, its function as a calendar, a ritual site, and a cosmic observatory is beyond doubt. The stones speak in angles and shadows. They teach through alignment. They remember when everything else is forgotten. In Mesoamerica, the Mayan temples and pyramids serve a similar purpose. The temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza casts a serpent-shaped shadow down its staircase during the equinoxes. This serpent, representing the god Quetzalcoatl, appears to descend from the sky to the earth. It is theatre and theology in one. But more than that, it is science encoded in sacred form. The Maya were tracking celestial cycles with extraordinary accuracy. They understood eclipses, Venus cycles, solar years. Their knowledge was built into their buildings, literally set in stone. The Inca used quipu-knotted strings to record data. Most of these were destroyed during the Spanish conquest, seen as pagan and dangerous. But the concept reveals a key truth. Wisdom does not always live in books. In Australia, Aboriginal peoples used songlines, stories tied to the land to navigate vast distances and encode ecological knowledge. Walk the land, sing the song, and you remember where the water is, where the food grows, when to travel. These systems preserved knowledge not for centuries, but for tens of thousands of years. What all of these examples share is a simple, powerful idea. Knowledge must be preserved in durable form. Not just physical durability, but cultural. A pyramid survives erosion. A song survives exile. A myth survives conquest. When a civilization builds with the long view in mind, it encodes its truths into forms that outlast fashion, language, and even collapse. This raises an uncomfortable question about our own time. What are we preserving? We have more information than any civilization before us stored in cloud servers, hard drives, magnetic tapes, but this information is fragile. It depends on electricity, on infrastructure, on software compatibility. A single solar storm, an extended blackout, a societal collapse, and entire libraries of digital knowledge could vanish. Bits rot. Data becomes unreadable. Formats become obsolete. Archaeologists already struggle to recover files from old floppy disks. Will future civilizations be able to read PDFs or decode binary code stored on a decomposing SSD? Will they even know where to look? Our knowledge is vast, but its vessel is delicate. The ancients built for permanence. We build for convenience. And if we fall, much of what we've learned may disappear with us. But not everything. Some knowledge will survive because it is encoded in material the earth does not easily erase. Fired clay, carved stone, alloyed metals. And some will survive because it is encoded in story. The myth of the flood, the memory of an age when people lived longer, built higher, knew more. These stories are strange, exaggerated, symbolic, but they persist. And in their persistence, they carry forward patterns of truth that even broken civilizations can recognize. The Sumerians preserved their king list not because they understood every part of it, but because they believed it mattered. They copied it for generations. They trained scribes to carve the same names, the same numbers, even when those numbers seemed impossible, even when the kings they listed were more legend than man. They did not preserve certainty, they preserved mystery, because mystery is memory with depth. Perhaps we need to think like the ancients again, not only in what we know, but in how we store it. What do we want the future to find? What will make them stop and wonder? What monuments will they measure? What myths will they decode? What whispers from the past will they hear in stone and shadow? It does not require massive pyramids or grand temples. It requires intention. To build with time in mind, to remember that the fall may come, to believe that what we know now is worth passing forward, even if the medium is myth, even if the messenger is silence. Because the past is not just what came before, it is what survived. For most people, the Sumerian King List appears at first glance to be just another oddity from the ancient world, a clay tablet, densely packed with wedge-shaped cuneiform writing, listing names that sound foreign and reigns that seem absurd. A king who ruled for 36,000 years? Another for 28,800? To the modern mind, it's easy to laugh and move on. But those who look more closely, who ask not what the numbers mean literally, but what they represent symbolically, begin to notice something strange. The numbers are not random. They follow a pattern, and the pattern hints at a deeper truth. The King List may be more than a royal ledger. It may be a cosmic clock. The Sumerians used a sexagesimal, or base 60, numerical system. It's a legacy that still shapes how we measure time: 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. But the Sumerians didn't just use these numbers out of convenience. They saw them as sacred, as reflections of the harmony of the heavens, and many of the reign lengths in the King List are precise multiples of 60 or of 3 liubai, which they called a sar. 1 sar equals 60 squared. 10 sars equal 36,000, exactly the reign of King Alaljar. This precision doesn't feel mythological, it feels mathematical. And that raises a fascinating possibility. The numbers in the King List were not meant to be lifespans, but measures of time, of epochs, of cycles, of celestial rhythms. What if these weren't rulers at all, but names given to ages? What if the list is not a history of kings, but a chronology of eras? A timekeeping system so old and sacred that even the Sumerians who copied it may not have fully understood what it encoded. Some researchers have noted that several of the largest reign lengths in the King List correspond roughly to important astronomical cycles. The precession of the equinoxes, for instance, takes around 25,920 years. That number appears, with slight variation, in different king reigns. Could this be coincidence? Perhaps. But the Sumerians were known to be skilled astronomers. They tracked the movements of the moon and planets. They knew the paths of Venus and Jupiter. They predicted eclipses. Their ziggurats may have functioned as observatories. They looked to the skies not just for inspiration, but for order. In that context, the King List begins to resemble a calendar, one not of days or years, but of ages. Each king becomes the ruler of a time segment. The flood becomes a reset, a recalibration, a zeroing of the clock. The post-flood reigns begin again, shorter and less cosmic in scale, reflecting the new rhythm of a changed world. Just as the Hindu yugas shrink in length and virtue, so too do the reigns of the Sumerian kings. The pattern is fractal. Long cycles mirror shorter ones. Cosmic time reflects human time. Another interpretation suggests the numbers were originally not in solar years at all, but in lunar months, seasons, or even ceremonial cycles. If a reign of 36,000 years is instead 36,000 months, it becomes 3,000 solar years, a long time, but not absurdly so. Enough for a dynasty, or even an entire culture. This theory posits that over centuries of copying, the original units were forgotten or reinterpreted. The numbers stayed the same, their meaning shifted. But what if the Sumerians knew exactly what they were doing? What if they encoded the reigns in mathematically perfect increments, not to mislead, but to preserve? The King List becomes not a chronology of individuals, but a time-coded message, a symbolic representation of the rhythm of history itself. Long periods of stability followed by collapse, then shorter periods of rebuilding. A pendulum swinging through time, a celestial heartbeat. The numbers in the list are too elegant to ignore. The total duration of the antediluvian reigns is 241, 200 years, a number divisible by 60, by Ch, Leubai, and other sacred units in the Sumerian system. The flood doesn't break the pattern, it reinforces it. After the flood, the numbers shrink consistently, 1, 200 years, then 960, then 900, then 600, then 120. They taper like a descending scale. By the time we reach kings known from archaeology, Ur-Nammu, Gilgamesh, the reigns are human in scale. 26 years, 34 years. Realistic durations, grounded in recorded history. This descending curve has a poetic feel to it. It's as if the King List records the loss of something, not just time, but memory, meaning, magnitude. Civilization forgets how to live in harmony with the cosmos. The kings shrink because the world shrinks. Time becomes shorter, more chaotic. The divine order that once reigned for tens of thousands of years now flickers with mortal limitations. This isn't fantasy. It's a eulogy for cosmic balance. And yet, the numbers remain, unchanged through centuries of copying. Scribes, even when they could not believe the reigns, preserved them with reverence. Why? Because they believed the numbers mattered. Even if the kings were forgotten, even if the meanings were obscured, the structure had to endure. The numbers were sacred. They were a kind of ritual, a formula passed through fire and time. This approach to preserve the form, even when the meaning is lost, is not unique. In many traditions, songs are sung long after their original words are no longer understood. Rituals continue even when their purpose is obscure, because the act of preservation itself becomes sacred, and perhaps that is the most important legacy of the King List. Not just the content, but the commitment, a belief that time has meaning, that history is not chaos, but pattern, that memory is not merely what we recall, but what we refuse to forget. We are often told to look at ancient texts through a rational lens, to separate myth from fact, magic from math. But what if, in doing so, we blind ourselves to the deeper truth? The ancients weren't just chronicling events, they were mapping meaning, encoding knowledge in forms we're only beginning to decode. The King List is not wrong because its numbers are large. It is meaningful because those numbers are precise. We may never know exactly what each reign signified. We may never unlock the full pattern. But the effort to understand matters. It forces us to reconsider what time is, what memory is, and how civilizations attempt to speak to the future. Because a civilization that understands time builds differently. It preserves not just facts, but patterns, not just data, but wisdom. It carves its memory into clay and trusts that someone, somewhere, someday will read it and wonder. If the Sumerian King List encodes cycles of rise and fall, then the question becomes, what drives these collapses? Why do civilizations that reach unimaginable heights eventually shatter into silence? Myth often attributes these falls to divine judgment floods sent by gods. Curses on arrogant kings. But beneath the poetic language of myth lies a harsh, observable truth. Civilizations are not only fragile, they exist within a volatile and unpredictable world. Volcanic eruptions, climate shifts, pandemics, asteroid impacts. These are not hypothetical threats. They are historical realities, and they leave scars not just on the land, but on memory. Take the Toba supereruption. For instance, around 74,000 years ago, Mount Toba in present-day Sumatra exploded with a force thousands of times more powerful than any volcanic eruption in recorded history. It ejected nearly 3,000 cubic kilometers of ash into the atmosphere, creating a volcanic winter that lasted for years. Global temperatures dropped by several degrees. Sunlight dimmed. Crops failed. According to some genetic studies, the human population may have shrunk to fewer than 10,000 breeding individuals, though the bottleneck theory remains debated. The eruption itself was real and catastrophic. If any early civilization had existed before Toba, it would have been utterly destroyed, and its memory, if preserved at all, would have been encoded in myth, passed down by survivors who spoke of darkness and endless cold. The gods grew angry. The sun disappeared. People vanished. In this way, natural disasters became divine stories, and divine stories became the bones of mythology. Fast forward to more recent times. In the year 536 CE, something terrible happened. Historians and scientists now recognize it as one of the worst years to be alive. Contemporary sources from Europe, the Middle East, and Asia describe the sun as dimmed, crops failing, famines spreading. Tree ring data confirms a sharp decline in global temperatures. Ice core samples show volcanic ash. The likely cause? A massive volcanic eruption, possibly in Iceland or North America, followed by another a few years later. The resulting climate anomalies weakened societies across the world. In the Byzantine Empire, the Justinian plague struck soon after, killing millions and accelerating the decline of the classical world. Events like these remind us how vulnerable civilizations are to environmental change. Even Rome, with its vast infrastructure and centuries of power, could not withstand the combined weight of internal decay and external shocks. Disease, to famine, AD war, and climate instability formed a deadly spiral. When the system breaks, the fall is often quick, but not all collapse is so dramatic. Some happen slowly, like the drying of the Sahara, which transformed once green landscapes into desert, or the shifting monsoons that disrupted the Indus Valley civilization, or the long droughts that weakened the Maya. These collapses often leave behind not just ruins, but stories of gods abandoning the people, of skies withholding rain, of great cities swallowed by jungle. To us, they are myths. To the survivors, they were history remembered in the only way it could endure. Another threat comes from above asteroids and comets. We know, without question, that a massive asteroid impact ended the age of the dinosaurs. Smaller impacts happen more frequently. In 1908, the Tunguska event flattened 2,000 square kilometers of Siberian forest. If it had struck a populated region, the devastation would have been enormous. The Younger Dryas, a sudden return to Ice Age conditions around 12,900 years ago, has been linked by some researchers to a comet impact or airburst. Though the evidence remains controversial, the effect was real. Temperatures plummeted. Megafauna died out. human populations shifted dramatically. If there were coastal civilizations at that time, they would have faced rising seas, cooling air, and global instability. And then there are solar storms. In 1859, the Carrington event, an enormous solar flare, sent a burst of charged particles toward Earth. Telegraph systems failed. Sparks flew from wires. Auroras lit up the skies as far south as the Caribbean. At the time, the damage was minor, but if a storm of that magnitude struck today, with our dependency on electricity, satellites, and digital infrastructure, the result could be catastrophic. Power grids would fail, communication would collapse, digital records would be wiped. In a matter of days, the fabric of modern civilization could unravel. No enemy needed, just the sun. All of these scenarios are not speculative science fiction. They are historical facts, geological certainties, astronomical probabilities. Civilizations don't fall only because of moral decay or political failure. Sometimes the earth moves, the sky burns, the seas rise, and all the brilliance of human achievement is silenced by ash, ice, or impact. But collapse doesn't always erase everything. Survivors remember, not in data, not in perfect timelines, but in fragments, in stories, in rituals, in numbers carved into tablets. This is why the preservation efforts of ancient peoples mattered so much. They understood that memory had to be encoded in forms that outlasted disaster. Clay, stone, song. They may not have known about precession or tectonics or viruses, but they knew that the world was fragile and that their stories needed to endure. That's why the Sumerians copied the King List even when the reigns seemed impossible. Why Egyptians aligned their monuments with stars. Why the Maya built temples that marked celestial events. These weren't acts of vanity. They were acts of continuity, efforts to hold on to knowledge through the darkness, to bridge the gap between cycles, to ensure that when the next civilization rose from the ashes, it would not be starting from zero. What we must ask ourselves is this: are we doing the same? Are we preparing for the fall? Not with fear, but with foresight. Are we building monuments of meaning, preserving wisdom in forms that can survive catastrophe? Or are we gambling everything on the illusion of permanence? Because the earth will move again, the sky will flare, the sea will rise. It always does. The only question is what remains when it's over. For all our technological advancement, for all the information we've gathered, stored, and shared, we remain perilously close to forgetting everything. Never before has so much knowledge existed, and never before has it been so fragile. While the ancients carved memory into clay, into stone, into stories passed mouth to mouth, we have chosen more delicate vessels, digital ones, code, acertic, and magnetic fields. We have built a civilization of glass and light, breathtaking in its complexity, yet frighteningly ephemeral. We often assume that our digital world is eternal. With a few keystrokes, we summon libraries of information, connect across continents, access the accumulated insights of generations. But beneath that convenience lies a hidden vulnerability. Hard drives fail, optical discs degrade, magnetic tapes lose fidelity, servers crash, formats become obsolete. A text file saved 20 years ago may be unreadable today without the right software. A document preserved on a CD might as well be locked in a chest at the bottom of the sea if no one has the key. This looming threat has a name: the digital dark age. It is the very real possibility that future generations, even those a few centuries from now, may not be able to access the digital records we now rely upon. Emails, scientific data, cultural archives, historical documents, even photographs and videos, all could be lost, not through disaster, but through decay. Unlike stone, digital data doesn't wear away slowly. It vanishes. One moment, it exists. The next, it's gone. Archivists and futurists have raised this alarm for decades. Some institutions are scrambling to address it. The Internet Archive, for example, is trying to preserve snapshots of the web. Projects like Long Now and Memory of Mankind are experimenting with millennial-scale storage, ceramic tablets etched with essential knowledge, designed to last for thousands of years. But these are exceptions. The overwhelming bulk of human knowledge, medical research, engineering blueprints, historical analysis. Cultural heritage exists in digital formats that are not built to endure, and even if the data itself survives, will future civilizations know how to read it? Will they understand our file systems, our encoding methods, our languages? If they stumble upon a solid-state drive buried in ash, what good is it without electricity, without a compatible reader, without knowledge of binary logic? To them, it may be no more informative than a polished stone, a relic of a forgotten world. Contrast this with the ancients. They knew collapse was inevitable. They prepared not by trying to store everything, but by preserving what mattered most. Their methods were crude by our standards, but their wisdom was profound. They carved into stone not because it was convenient, but because it was durable. They encoded meaning in myth, metaphor, and ritual because those things could be remembered even when writing was lost. They thought in centuries. We think in software updates. Perhaps it's time to rethink our priorities. If our civilization were to fall, if war, disaster, or system failure wiped away our infrastructure, what would be left? Cities would decay, screens would go dark, books would mould, but a handful of things might survive. Stone monuments, bronze tools, plastic artifacts, and maybe, if we've been wise, a few deliberate records etched into resilient media, stored in safe places, designed to speak not to us, but to the unknown future. We must ask, what is worth preserving? Not everything. Much of what we store today is noise trivial, temporary, disposable. But some truths are timeless. The structure of DNA, the periodic table, the principles of arithmetic, the laws of thermodynamics, stories of cooperation, warnings about overreach, knowledge about agriculture, medicine, and the cycles of the earth. These are the seeds of civilization. These are the truths that help a species rebuild. Ancient people may not have known the science behind solar storms or volcanic winters, but they understood that the world was unpredictable. They knew that the arc of progress could bend backward, and so they preserved what they could. The Sumerian King List, the flood myths, the astronomical alignments of sacred sites, these were not superstitions. They were messages. They were attempts to transmit memory through chaos. Today, we are the inheritors of their memory and the guardians of our own. If we are indeed part of a long chain of civilizations, then our task is not only to thrive, but to pass forward what we've learned, not just the tools, but the patterns, not just the data, but the meaning. We must build libraries that can survive darkness. We must teach values that can outlast turmoil. We must create stories that can be remembered when the lights go out. Some efforts are already underway. The Voyager Golden Records, launched into space aboard twin probes, carry sounds and images from Earth greetings in dozens of languages, music, photographs, and scientific diagrams. They may drift through space for billions of years, but their audience is unknown, and their chances of being found are small here on Earth. Efforts like the Global Seed Vault in Svalbard aim to preserve the genetic legacy of our food supply. These are noble steps, but still few, still fragile. In the end, the most powerful tool we have may still be story. Myths encode survival lessons in ways that transcend literacy. They resonate across generations. Even when their origins are forgotten, the tale of a great flood, for example, reminds us that the world can change suddenly, that memory must be carried forward, that wisdom matters more than pride. So what stories are we writing for the future? What monuments are we building, not of steel and glass, but of meaning and memory? Will our descendants look back at our time and find a signal in the noise, a beacon in the rubble? Or will they find only silence? We may not know how to stop collapse, but we can choose how to meet it. Not with panic, but with preparation. Not with arrogance, but with humility. Not with despair, but with the quiet confidence that something of us can survive if we choose wisely. Because knowledge decays, memory fades, but story endures. And sometimes that is enough. Legacy is not what we build, it's what we pass forward. Long after our machines fall silent, after our buildings crack and collapse, after our languages fragment into dialects and disappear, something will remain. The question is, what? And more importantly, why? When the dust settles, when future eyes examine the ruins of our time, will they see only a people who consumed, expanded, and vanished? Or will they find traces of wisdom, a conscious attempt to preserve not just knowledge, but understanding? The ancients seemed to know that everything material is temporary. They saw cities rise and crumble, rivers shift their course, empires grow bloated and decay. But instead of despairing, they focused on transmission. The Sumerians carved their king list not because they expected anyone to believe kings lived for tens of thousands of years, but because they wanted the pattern preserved. The Egyptians painted their walls with rituals, not blueprints. The Maya encoded cosmic cycles in stone. Each generation knew it might be forgotten, but it refused to let memory die quietly. Today, we pride ourselves on being the most advanced civilization in history. And perhaps we've unlocked the atom, touched the moon, mapped the human genome, and built machines that simulate thought. But intelligence is not wisdom. Power is not foresight. Our libraries are full, but our perspective is narrow. We think in quarters, in election cycles, in viral trends, rarely in generations, almost never in centuries. Yet this is exactly the shift we must make. If history teaches anything, it is that collapse is possible, even likely. No society has been immune, and those that fell often did so not for lack of brilliance, but for lack of balance. They pushed beyond their limits. They extracted more than they replenished. They mistook size for strength, speed for direction. They ignored the signs until it was too late. We may be doing the same, but unlike them, we have the advantage of hindsight. We can read the stories of their decline. We can choose differently. That choice begins with a question. What do we value? Not just in words, but in action. Do we prioritize short-term growth over long-term stability? Do we treat the earth as a machine to exploit or as a system to live within? Do we see ourselves as conquerors of nature, or as participants in its cycles, these are not philosophical musings. They are survival questions, and the answers will shape not only our future, but the future of whatever comes after us. Preserving wisdom is more than writing it down. It means living it, teaching it, embodying it in culture, in story, in ritual. It means passing forward not only facts, but principles, humility before complexity, reverence for the living world, responsibility for those who come next. These are not new ideas. Indigenous traditions have preserved them for millennia. So have the myths we so often dismiss as primitive, the flood myths, the cyclical ages, the warnings against hubris, they are all saying the same thing. Respect the balance. Remember the fall. Build with the future in mind. This doesn't mean abandoning technology or retreating into superstition. It means integrating wisdom with innovation, designing systems that endure, encouraging thinking that spans generations. We can engineer for resilience. We can plan for the long now. We can teach children to see themselves not as consumers, but as stewards. It is not about perfection. It is about direction. Already, there are signs of this awakening. The Long Now Foundation is building a clock designed to tick for 10,000 years, an invitation to think in deep time. Some engineers are exploring how to encode knowledge into synthetic DNA, stable for thousands of years in the right conditions. Farmers are rediscovering ancient methods of sustainable agriculture. Architects are relearning how to build with local materials that breathe, adapt. And last, these are not regressions. They are integrations. They are steps toward a civilization that survives its own adolescence. Still, this work is difficult. Our systems reward speed, profit, convenience. But civilizations that endure are not the fastest. They are the most adaptable. And adaptation requires vision. The Sumerians could not have predicted how their clay tablets would one day be deciphered by strangers across oceans and millennia. Yet they wrote anyway. They trusted the act of preservation. So must we. Even if collapse comes as it has come before, it need not be the end. What matters is what survives. The survivors of every past fall passed forward fragment seeds, stories, rhythms, and those fragments allowed something new to grow. Each cycle has carried more. The Renaissance carried the spark of Rome. The Enlightenment built on the ruins of faith and fire. Our civilization carries the memory of every one that came before. We are not the beginning. We are the continuation. And so, we must ask ourselves, what are we choosing to continue? What are we leaving behind not by accident, but by intention? Will our monuments be marketing slogans or messages of meaning? Will our stories teach excess or balance? Will our technologies vanish with the power grid or point the way forward? The ancients built with eternity in mind. They knew they would be misunderstood, forgotten, even misinterpreted. But they also knew that meaning survives in pattern, that truth survives in repetition, that wisdom, once planted, may lie dormant for centuries and still bloom again. This is the legacy we can choose. Not certainty, not permanence, but continuity, a thread through the dark. We are not the first to face this moment. We will not be the last. But we can be the generation that remembered, that chose to preserve not just information, but insight, not just artifacts, but awareness, not just monuments, but meaning, because in the end, the most powerful legacy is not what we build, but what we teach the future to remember. Picture Earth from orbit. The blue marble, streaked with clouds, spins silently in the black. Zoom in, and you begin to see traces of us, cities like constellations, glowing softly through the night. Roads carve veins through continents. Ships drift across oceans. Satellites blink in the upper atmosphere. From above, it feels eternal, but from within, we know the truth. This world, this civilization, this moment, it breathes, it inhales, it exhales, it rises, it falls, and we are a breath within that long rhythm. All throughout history, civilizations have believed they were permanent. Rome believed it was the eternal city. The Egyptians built for millennia. The Maya carved cycles into stone. And yet, each of them fell, not because they were weak, but because they were alive, and everything alive moves through cycles. Growth, flowering, decay, renewal. The earth itself works this way. So do stars, species, ecosystems, and empires. So do we. The Sumerians may have understood this more deeply than we imagine. They left behind a record not just of kings, but of cycles. Not just of rule, but of rhythm. The King List, strange as it is, encodes more than dates. It maps the pattern of ascent and decline. It tells us there were ages before the flood, and ages after. It tells us that memory contracts, that time shortens, that what is divine eventually becomes mortal, and perhaps that what is mortal may become divine again. This pattern is echoed in myth, in astronomy, in geology, in archaeology. Civilizations rise higher than those before, yet remain vulnerable to the same forces: environmental stress, overextension, spiritual fatigue. And yet, in each fall, something survives. A story, a structure, a seed. The breath is not a loop, it is a spiral. With each collapse, some lessons are preserved. With each rise, we begin not from nothing, but from fragments carried forward. We may be, as some suggest, the 7th civilization to reach this level of advancement, or the 10th, or the 100th. The number doesn't matter. What matters is that each time something is preserved. Each time the survivors remember just enough to begin again. We are the children of survivors, the inheritors of broken worlds, and we carry in us the voices of those who came before. What, then, will we pass forward? We often speak of progress as if it were linear. We imagine ourselves immune to collapse because we are modern, because we have technology, because we know more than our ancestors. But knowledge is not immunity. Our global systems are interconnected but brittle. Our information is vast but volatile. We are brilliant but not invincible. And if the cycle turns again, if the breath draws inward, we may find ourselves where others have stood, rebuilding. Yet there is hope in this. Hope not in avoiding the fall forever, but in preparing for what comes after, in choosing to preserve what matters, in encoding truths that can be recognized even when the context is lost, in teaching our descendants not only how we lived, but how we fell and what we learned in the process. The ancients left us patterns. The flood myths, the Yuga cycles, the Egyptian calendars, the Mayan stones, all of them speak the same language. Remember that time is vast, that civilizations are brief, that wisdom must be carried, not assumed, that the future depends not on what we build, but on what we preserve. We must now become the ancients for some future people. Our era, our language, our technologies may one day be as distant and mysterious as Sumer is to us. Will they wonder who we were? Will they see only ruins and plastic and broken machines? Or will they find messages left with care, alignments carved into stone, numbers chosen for meaning, stories that hold patterns? It's easy to despair in the face of such uncertainty. But legacy is not about control. It's about intention. We cannot guarantee what will be remembered, but we can choose what to leave behind. We can build things that speak not of our power, but of our understanding, not of our reach, but of our roots. Think of the scribes at Nippur, copying the King List by hand, pressing symbols into clay. Did they know we would one day read them? Did they imagine airplanes, satellites, or artificial intelligence? Probably not. But they copied anyway, faithfully, carefully, because they believed it mattered. They didn't need certainty. They only needed purpose. So do we. This is not just a story about the past. It is a story about now, about how we live, how we think, how we plan. It is a call to humility and to responsibility. If we are to be remembered, let it be for our wisdom, not just our ambition. If we are to endure, let it be because we learned, not because we conquered. And if we fall, let us fall with the grace of those who prepared the way for what comes next. Because civilizations rise, civilizations fall, but the breath of humanity continues, and with each exhale, a message may ride the wind, a message carved in stone, spoken in myth, remembered in rhythm. We were here. We knew some things. We hoped you would find them.